off-season strategy that does not include Saquon Barkley and includes a bigger investment at wide receiver. That's how I would have approached the offseason back in March. Howie Roseman had different plans. We'll compare and contrast next on the PHLY Eagles Show. Good afternoon and welcome to a Monday edition of the PHLY Eagles Show. I'm Zach Berman here with Rich Hoffman, and we were on screen on Friday, but we're back here for a fresh week. The Eagles are, as we'll discuss tomorrow, 2 weeks away from training camp, so quickly approaching. We're in that quiet period of off-season content, but clearly we have much to discuss. Rich, how was your weekend?
Zach, it was great. It was pretty hot, I got to say. So I didn't really do a lot. You know, I kind of hung inside, watched some soccer. You're not that big into soccer, are you?
U.S. soccer, not as much the Euros right now.
Well, you
the
can't.
U.S. is out, so yeah.
Yeah, you can't have that right now. The one thing I will say about soccer right now, and this is kind of my American take, which is maybe my uncultured take. The penalty kicks when they stop and start on the penalty kicks. Have you seen this?
Stop and start on the penalty kick.
Like they run up.
Oh, yeah, okay, yes. Like the stutter step, essentially.
Yeah. Okay. Not a full stop, but a stutter. Enough of that. That shouldn't be a rule. You got to run up and kick that thing as hard as you can, or it's soft, doesn't matter, but I don't like that level of deceit. That's my one
I like
take.
strategy, right? You're trying to...
Yeah, but I think they're cheating, though. Like, I think they are actually stopping sometimes, which I don't think is fair, but...
I don't know enough about penalty kicks, but all's fair in trying to score that goal. I spent the weekend, or at least a part of it, reviewing my off-season projections. And what I mean by that is each March, what I do before the off-season is I take all the Eagles' resources. I take the Eagles' draft picks. I take the Eagles' money, figuratively, of course, not literally. And
you round
the players who are free agents, the players on the roster. And I say, this is what I would do if I were Howie Roseman. And this is how, obviously, what I do doesn't matter, or I should say what I would do doesn't matter. It's Howie's actions that matter. But two things. This is a helpful exercise because it allows you to be realistic in your actions, right? You can't just say, I would go sign player X, Y, and Z. There's no money left. I would draft this player. It does not work that way. You're doing it before you know how money's spent, how the draft would fall, right? So of course there's an old quote that that planning is essential and plans are useless because once you can do all the planning, but then you have to react on the fly. And then the other part, too, is it allows me to hold myself accountable. I can do what we're doing on today's show, which is go back and say, all right, I kind of was on the same wavelength as Howie here. Howie outsmarted me here, or I shouldn't say Howie did something here that I should have thought of, or maybe Howie should have thought of this. And I've done this now for about 5 years. And in the past few years, there's actually been a decent amount of overlap between kind of what I did or in my projections and then what Howie ended up doing, which probably means that I'm thinking too much like Howie.
You're Howie pilled, man.
Is not a good sign. But that's kind of what we're doing today. Is we're gonna hold me accountable. We're gonna review those projections, and we're gonna see how what I thought compared and contrasted to what Howie did.
Yeah, and that's gonna be fun. We're gonna hold you accountable. Everybody in the chat's gonna hold you very accountable. I did have one question though, for you, because you read and you kind of keep up with everything around the league and the Eagles. I think as much as anybody I know. What is like the off-season reading schedule for you? Do you have like a time during this dead period, this relatively dead period, where you're just like, I got to get to this? Or do you have a specific routine where you're reading a certain preview or whatever? Or is this kind of when you unplug a little bit? What's
I don't unplug.
Yeah, that's true. That was a stupid question.
I probably should. I should unplug more. I mean, no, the off season. So I'll say this. I have a lot more time for this reason because, about like 5:45 each morning, I go to the Inquirer's app. I go to the Athletics app. I go to NBC Sports Philly, and I go to all the people who cover the Eagles, right? And but this time of year, there's not as much content so it doesn't take as much time. So I'm able to read kind of more outside. But I do have a morning routine of what I read through. Some things I missed, like Calais Campbell being signed. Unfortunately, I missed that for the draft that we did last Tuesday here. And then I try to listen and watch as much as I can too. So I listen when I'm in the car, when I'm taking a walk. I watch on YouTube quite a bit. And so, but this time of year, there's less like substantial content to consume. There's a lot of recycled content. I say that on a day when I'm recycling a story from March. But that's just the honest truth.
Do you ever have like a bunch of reading just pile up? Or is it like, whatever your morning routine is, when the morning's over, that day's over and you're not going to get to it? Or do you have stuff on kind of backlog?
No, I have a lot backlogged right now because actually, I don't mean to make this about me, but
no, I do. Yeah.
I'm in the final week of teaching a class at Colorado State, and the final projects are due. And I empathize with all teachers out there because like it is daunting when you see. I mean, I imagine it's daunting to do the project, but I didn't fully appreciate back when I was in school that I just have to do one, but then the teacher has to read and watch all of them, right? So this is going to take a good chunk of time this week.
Yeah. You a tough grader? What's the deal there?
I think
tough but fair?
I think I'm an easier grader than I was my first year.
Okay.
I think I read all the reviews. Surprise, surprise.
Are you going to rate my professor?
No, the students submit at the end of the year feedback.
Oh, okay.
And I read the reviews, and I tried to make adjustments. I tried to make adjustments accordingly. Yeah. Actually, this kind of ties into what you're saying. One of the pieces of feedback was that I assigned too much reading. Surprise, surprise, there, right?
Wait a minute. So the reviews are just too much reading, and my grades aren't good enough. That's
no. There was. I have guest interviews for each course. They loved hearing the perspective of others. The students were great, but yeah, no, there were certain things that I can be a little more lenient on, and I think I'm an evolving professor.
All right. Well, trial and error.
Or I shouldn't say about professor, evolving visiting faculty member. There was a viewer who corrected me one day.
Rate my visiting faculty member.
Yeah, rate my visiting faculty member.
Okay, so the students were holding you accountable.
Yes. Hold me accountable here. Let's go. So back in March, I did a 15-step offseason guide, how I would approach the season if I were Howie Roseman. Obviously, the offseason happened. Most of these moves occurred. And now I went back. You can read this now on allphly.com if you're a diehard member, where I have an excerpt of what I wrote and then kind of looking back at it. So let's do.
By the way, great idea for content.
Thank
you. You called it recycled, but it's hard to come up with content at this time of the year. Perfect.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Great idea.
And in the past, when I've done this, actually, it's gone over well with readers because you always like to kind of go back and say, what would you have done? Bo does a great job with his shadow draft.
Yeah.
And I like that because the one thing I think is kind of, I don't want to say hypocritical, but is incomplete is when reporters say, oh, I would have done this. Well, yeah, you say that after the fact when you know what this guy signed for, right? Like, teams are saying, I would have signed Caleb Martin for 4 years, 32. Well, yeah, if you knew that's what the price was going to be, right? So it's much better to do it ahead of time. And so the first one I said I would find a resolution with Hassan Reddick I said if a 3-year, $65 million contract would keep him in Philly, I'd try to make it work. If the average annual salary he will fetch on the market is pushing upwards of $25 million, I consider what a trade delivers. So what happened? Well, clearly he wanted more than 3 years, 65. That was not a realistic number. The Eagles traded him to the Jets. They get a 2026 pick. With the Jets right now, Hassan Reddick has not signed a new deal. He sat out mandatory minicamp. Clearly, there's a contract there's contract negotiations or contract disagreements going on. How do you think Howie Roseman approached the Hassan Reddick situation?
I'm still unsure. So let me ask you: do you feel any better, or I guess not as a fan? Do you look more favorably on the Eagles' decision, how they handled the Reddick situation? Now that the Jets, like, I don't know what they're doing right now. Like, he clearly is not happy. The idea that's like, oh, no, we traded for him. There was like a report that was like, no, there was an understanding that maybe he'll get paid after the season. It's like, no, that's the reason the Eagles traded him to you, you dummies. But that said, from the Eagles standpoint, like, would you, there is the incentive element to this too. And you want Reddick to play a bunch of snaps, right? Because then you get a second round pick instead of the first round pick. So I don't know where I land on this from the Eagles' perspective. I think the Jets have a bad situation on their hands. Like if they just thought, okay, yeah, he'll just be a happy camper and he'll come in and kill it in the same exact situation he would have had in Philly, probably a worse situation because he's not home and he's not, near Camden and all of those things. But I don't know about the Eagles. What do you think?
Yeah, so it's a good point. Well, first off, I look at it and say they're not a better team without Hassan Reddick than they were with him. Hassan Reddick's an elite player. Don't take any spin that he's like a one-trick pony. Like if the one trick is sacking the quarterback, that's a really important trick.
It's a good trick.
He's an elite player. That said, when you talk about what the contract range is going to be, I think he wants more than $25 million. I think when you look at what some of the top edge rushers got on the open market, you look at the Brian Burns deal, you look at some of the top pass rushers in the league, then Hassan Reddick's within his rights, he's obviously within his rights. He's within reason to want that type of deal. So I get the Eagles moving on from him. I don't think the Eagles are better off, but I think they reallocated that money in a good way, in a productive way, and we'll kind of get into that. I thought they would fetch more than what they did.
Me too.
And so that's the part of this that surprised me was a 2026 third rounder that can become a second rounder. So I don't know if Howie could have gotten more earlier in the offseason. I don't know, like by holding on to him, by doing it post-free agency. I don't know if maybe it would have made sense to hold him until after the draft. I don't mind the 2026 pick so much, but what I thought Hassan Reddick was a better player than what he got in the trade market.
Yeah, it feels like there is at least a chance it's a lose-lose if on the other end of this, the Bryce Huff end doesn't work out. Like the Eagles we don't know that they have that premium pass rusher. I know Bryce Huff on a per snap basis suggests that he can be that guy, but we haven't seen it yet. So, and it was funny. I think Cousin Grace pointed this out in the chat. Like Hassan Reddick during Jets minicamp was just walking around Japan, just loving
not bad, right?
Yeah.
It's good work. Look, I've always said there's this. No, the mandatory minicamp is mandatory, right? But like voluntary workouts, there's this like idea, and we in the media are kind of like, why weren't you there? Well, I mean, it's voluntary. If you don't have to be there, if you're a premium player, you can do what you want, right? You got to be there if you're pushing for a spot on the team. Well, if you're Hassan Reddick, operate with your leverage, right? It's like going to a new student orientation when you're like, I don't need to do that. He's fine. So,
what do you think about the money though? Like what? Because you mentioned in your piece that if it got near 25 million, then you might have decided to move on. And you look at some of the contracts. You mentioned Burns, but there's also Danielle Hunter did it. What was he? 2 years, like 49 million. It was something like that. Jonathan Greenard signed, I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. Yep. He signed, I think it was a 4-year, $75 million deal, something like that. What do you think the number would have been that Reddick would have been happy with? Do you think I actually don't think it would have been under the $25 million.
No, I agree. I think that you cited Daniil Hunter. I think that's a good reference point. So he signs 2 for $49. That's 24.5 a year, right? I thought, I mean, the reason I put 25 in there is kind of, that's the number I was hearing, right? And so I think that's hefty, because the Eagles were able to then turn and pay Landon Dickerson, but they were to pay Devontae Smith. They were to do some of these other moves that they did. And if you're getting a fraction of that production from Bryce Huff, and then so they signed, we'll get to Bryce Huff, but they signed Bryce Huff for $17 million a year, right? So if there's an $8 million dollar delta there, and you can reallocate that money elsewhere, then I'm fine with that. But I'm surprised. Or I thought Hassan Reddick would want north of 25, and I don't think the Eagles were ever going to go north of 25.
Yeah, so it's basically one of those situations where I'm still not crazy about the compensation that the Eagles got back. Because, like, let's say he leaves the Jets. There's a chance, right, that it could be a third-round comp pick. Like, it's not that much of a difference. But considering how unhappy he is, and considering how much of a plan they didn't seem to have, and, like, how unprepared the Jets were for, hey, we're not going to pay you this year, but are you going to react differently to us? Like, I definitely feel worse about it for them than initially. Like, when that trade compensation came out, I was like, Hassan Reddick is a really good player. Like, I think that is pretty light for him to get him back in return. Seeing how things have gone, I'm not as crazy about it from the Jets standpoint, but I'm also still a little skeptical from the Eagles.
Yeah, I'm going to stay in my Eagles. Well, I was doing this thing where I was saying I'm going to stay in my Eagles lane and then not leave my Eagles lane. I'm going to kind of have
how many lanes are there?
I'm going to have Daryl Morey's back here. Like, there's this, I kept hearing in all these various trade negotiations, whether it was Ben Simmons, whether it was James Harden, like, they should do this deal, they should do that deal. A GM like Daryl Morey, a GM like Howie Roseman, I don't think they're like not exhausting the marketplace, right? Like, I think Howie Roseman had an idea what he was going to be able to get when he made the trade. I think he wanted more. I think he took the best deal he was able to get at the time. And so I was surprised Hassan didn't get more, but I don't think that was on Howie. I think the fact that they held on to him until really I think it was March 31st when they made the deal, I think that shows they were trying as much as they could to exhaust that marketplace.
Yeah, it's like the thing. I think you and Bo have made light of this, that all these reports that Howie is making calls. Yeah. Like, it's not that impressive for a GM to be doing that. I mean, it's impressive for me. I hate making calls. Like, really? I could never be. Getting somebody on the phone.
I don't mind that. Really?
No, I don't. That's why you could be a GM. That's why you are.
I would love that.
We're holding you accountable and not me.
Yes.
I couldn't do it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree with you. Like, he clearly was, and is somebody who definitely pitches trades around the league and takes the temperature. You hear that from other people around the league. So this is almost assuredly the best deal he could have gotten. I also think what the Giants gave up for Brian Burns is instructive too, right? Like, sure, they didn't get a ton either. So
because they didn't
give up a ton either.
It's the player plus the money. That's what you have to factor into it. So the second part here is, if Reddick is traded, think big about his replacement. I said, if you can't get Brian Burns, at least you took a swing. I then look for an emerging pass rusher in free agency. My target would be Bryce Huff, a rotational pass rusher with the Jets, coming off a 10-sack season. If his salary is in the mid-teens, that would be a good direction. I'm not trying to pat myself on the back.
Howie Berman over here. Wow.
But yeah, I can't knock. I said this sitting in this seat right here, pounding the table, when the Eagles signed Bryce Huff that day. I was like, I can't rip on this move because it's literally the move I said I would do. How do you think the Eagles pivoted from the Hassan Reddick situation?
I don't know. Mm-hmm. You know, obviously we know the gamble that Huff is, right? Like, he is the guy who did not have a full-time role, but really flashed over the past year. We'll see if it works out. But I will say I am more skeptical of the Eagles pass rush than I have been heading into the season over the past few years. Now, in fairness, like, the pass rush was terrible at the end of last season. It was completely non-existent. So maybe that's a good thing. So I don't know. We'll see.
well said. We'll get much more into Bryce Huff as camp approaches. I will say before we get to the ad on the phone call thing, I don't mind being on the phone. What I don't like is letting the phone call linger. I think like the phone call needs to have a purpose. So you talk, you do it, you have your conversation, and those people who it's like they're hanging around on the phone for like 4 minutes longer. It's like, so what else is new? Nothing else is new. There was a purpose to this call. So that's my pet peeve. Or the whole preamble before it's like someone calls and it's like, yeah, how are the kids? How's your son? It's like, no, you called me with an ask, or I called you with an ask. Let's get right to that. That's kind of my phone call pet peeve.
What's the ideal cutoff on a phone call?
The ideal cutoff?
Yeah. Like what's the max you're doing?
Oh, I'm thinking like 5 minutes. Like after the actual substance, because there's times you have to flesh something out for 15, 20 minutes, right? But when you're at a point like afterwards, 2 minutes, like I would say 2 to 5 minutes post, like when everything's wrapped up, you can't go much beyond that. You don't need to. The whole purpose of the call is to achieve something, is to have that. So you talk, you had the conversation. You don't need to keep going on and on and on.
Well said.
But before we keep going, let me tell everybody about Rocket Money. And I bring up Rocket Money because it is a good place to turn for many reasons. Most importantly, that you have subscriptions that you forget about, right? And I'm guilty of this. And you pay for them twice, or you don't realize that they auto-renew. I am at fault sometimes of before like a fantasy football season, when we'll get the fantasy football this week, like I'll subscribe to something on a monthly basis and then it re-ups and like, I don't need that in, February or whatever it may be. Well, anyways, Rocket Money is a place to cancel the subscription for you, or they can alert you to an increase in subscription price. Rocket Money is a personal finance app that finds and cancels your unwanted subscriptions and monitors your spending, and it helps you lower bills so that you can grow your savings. With Rocket Money, I have full control over my subscriptions and a clear view of my expenses. I can see all my subscriptions in one place, and if I see something I don't want, Rocket Money can help me cancel it with a few taps. I love how the dashboard shows me this month's spending compared to last month, so I can see clearly my spending habits. Plus, they'll help me create a custom budget and keep my spending on track. Rocket Money will even try to negotiate lower bills for you by up to 20%. That is music to my ears. All you have to do is submit a picture of your bill, and Rocket Money takes care of the rest. They'll deal with customer service for you. So they'll get on the phone, right, when you don't want to. Rocket Money has over 5 million users and has saved a total of $500 million in canceled subscriptions, saving members up to $740 a year when using all of the app's features. Stop wasting money on things you don't use. Cancel your unwanted subscriptions by going to rocketmoney.com/PHLY. That's rocketmoney.com/PHLY. rocketmoney.com/PHLY. I also want to tell you about Rite Aid Refreshery, okay? My son and my daughter had a lemonade stand this weekend. It was awesome to see. And I know on a hot day, people want those refreshments. So if there's not, really entrepreneurial 7 and 5-year-old on the corner selling lemonade, the place to go to is Rite Aid. Okay, Rite Aid has products that include water with purified spring, electrolyte, distilled, and alkaline bottled water, flavored waters. I've had all their waters. It's high quality water. They have coconut water, which has power-packed array of essential nutrients, fat-free, gluten-free, non-GMO with less than 1% sugar, single-served iced tea, juice, and lemonade, sweetened with real sugar, no preservatives. They have juices for crowds, including pineapple, cranberry, apple, strawberry lemonade, and many other flavors. Cold-pressed juices that are crafted from 100% fruits and juices, organic, non-GMO, no added sugars. It's important to stay hydrated, especially during these summer months. Get refreshment delivered. Shop online at riteaid.com/shop for same-day delivery, or buy online, pick up in store of Refreshery products. You can pick up Refreshery products in store. So that is Rite Aid. And now we're going to go back to holding me accountable, which is always important to do.
Let's do it. Let's go to the secondary.
Sign a starting safety. This is number 3. Sign a starting safety with the profile of Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod. As I read this, I'm not trying to flex, okay? I'm just reading what I wrote in March.
Look at you. You and Howie. Simpatico.
I will look at history as a guide and channel what worked with Malcolm Jenkins and Rodney McLeod, a mid-20s player who's not coming off a career season, but could emerge as a better player in his second contract than his first. I mentioned a handful of players in there, but then I said C.J. Gardner-Johnson would interest me if bygones are bygones. The Eagles missed his personality on defense last season, and he's a ball hawk with safety, slot, cornerback versatility. The contract could be discounted relative to last season's ask.
Nailed it. So I will say the one guy that I was a little bit bummed that they did not sign this year, and it sounded like it was close, was Xavier McKinney. He just had the profile to me of the kind of new Malcolm Jenkins where, and frankly, he probably had proved a little bit more at the time of the Eagles signing him. Honestly, I think we don't talk about the Malcolm Jenkins signing enough, like the initial one in 2014. Do you remember, like, on Sports Talk Radio, they were talking about Jairus Byrd for...
I remember well. I mean, T.J. Ward? Yeah.
Was that like a month worth of Jairus Byrd? It was, oh, man, Chip Kelly was there when he was there at Oregon, and he's the main signing. And then the Saints just, who I didn't really think had the room to sign him, kind of did some crazy salary cap gymnastics to sign him. And then here comes Malcolm Jenkins for 3 years. 15. And not only is he a better player than those guys, but he's the leader of your Super Bowl team. I mean, just absolute home run.
Agree. Yeah, I mean, you don't need to convince me on Malcolm Jenkins. Shrewd move by the Eagles. At the time, I was like, Jairus Byrd's the perfect fit. You know him, right? There was a clear need at safety. The Eagles scouted that well. Malcolm Jenkins was perfect for Philly. One of the great free agent signings. And one of the great book forward writers as well.
Very nice.
So look, I hear what you're saying about Xavier McKinney. So I in this blurb, I mentioned him as the guy I would target, and I think he's the guy the Eagles would have liked. He signed a 4-year, $67 million contract. I don't think the Eagles were going to go that high at safety. The player who I said they could look for as a cheaper alternative was Jordan Fuller. He was leaving the Rams. I liked him as like a Malcolm Jenkins type player. He signed a 1-year, $3.25 million deal in Carolina. I do like Jordan Fuller. I think C.J. Gardner-Johnson's a better player. The Eagles signed C.J. Gardner-Johnson to a deal that could be a 1-year deal, basically, if it doesn't work out. Could be longer. C.J. Gardner-Johnson's of the age profile and the playing profile that would that I think really benefits the Eagles. We saw it 2 years ago. He's a real talented player. He's an ideal fit for what they want to do. I like that signing quite a bit. I also mentioned his competitive zeal because I do think the Eagles were missing that. And Howie Roseman said as much back in March that the Eagles were missing that type of player. And wait. Okay, well, I'm sorry. I should be looking at the screen. We'll get to that. So anyways, I look at C.J. Gardner-Johnson as the ideal place to turn from a cost perspective and a playing perspective. Obviously, I'd rather Xavier McKinney, but at the cost they signed C.J., I thought it was a good move.
Versatility, attitude, and you know what you were getting with him, right? Like there is a familiarity, and frankly, he's played with some of the guys who are here. I think it's a very, very good signing. Yes. I would have wanted Xavier McKinney. That's the home run pick, but he also would have cost a lot more money. And I think CJ is a middle option between him and Jordan Fuller. Nothing wrong with that.
Well said. By the way, here, I DM'd Zach a quality show idea in May, and he big time me. Chris, I promise you, I did not big time you. If the
Get
idea,
off the phone, Chris.
Chris, if the idea was the cap show, I promise you, I put work into trying to get the ideal guest for it. I'm still putting work into that. If it's not the cap show, follow up with me on DM. If it's either Twitter or Instagram, I promise you, I will write back to you. But I've definitely someone gave me an idea for a salary cap show, breaking down the salary cap, and trust me, Vince over there, my boss, Vince wants me to do it as well. I'm working on it. I have a few emails out and trying to get that back. Maybe I need to pick up the phone, right? Mm-hmm. That could be my problem. All right, next one here. Sign a starting linebacker with the biggest financial investment in the position since Nigel Bradham. And I wrote, I'm not suggesting the Eagles get into the Patrick Queen market. But I said the $5 to $8 million range is a more likely option. I wouldn't treat this like last season when they waited until August for veterans on low-cost deals. The Eagles signed Devin White it was reported that at the time they signed him as 1 year, $7.5 million. It was really 1 year, $4 million, right? I did not put Devin White in my write-up. Good job, Howie Roseman. Did not did not follow my guide there, because I think Devin White was a better outcome than what I was suggesting. What do you think about the Devin White signing?
I mean, they still went pretty light. Like, it wasn't a huge investment in the linebacker position. Do you think after OTAs it is fair to say that you are most confident Devin White is going to be a starter among the linebackers?
Yeah, I think Devin White's their number one linebacker. It would surprise me if he's not. I can't tell you Nakobe Dean's going to start. I can't tell you Zach Bond's going to start. I can tell you I'm fairly confident Devin White's going to start.
So, I mean, they went light at linebacker. We will see if it turns out as well as Nigel Bradham, who was awesome for a couple years. Awesome, versatile player. I don't know. You know, Devin White coming off the rough year. Did Fangio have anything to say about him?
Yeah, Vic Fangio, they're hoping that he gets back to kind of what he was in Tampa Bay. Now Devin White, and when I say earlier on in his career in Tampa Bay, because he had a down year last year. He says he's trying to show Vic Fangio that he can blitz. He's an effective blitzer. He said Vic Fangio is going to use you to maximize your skill set. So, I mean, Devin White, the athleticism's never been a question, right? He's made plays on the ball. He's made plays as a blitzer. He was just really inconsistent last year. I still think this is a bigger investment than what the Eagles have made in recent years. When you look at it, Zach Cunningham, Miles Jack last year. This is a bigger investment than that. Some of the other signings that they've had that were kind of ill-fated, whether it was like Zach Brown or now the Kaiser White signing worked out. That was 1 year, $3 million. But this does represent a bigger investment than they typically make at linebacker. And from an age profile, I actually think he's a player that if he's good, similar to Nigel Bradham, they can give him another contract to stay in Philly. The next one here is let the market come to you at running back with a DeAndre Swift return and option. I don't need to read the whole thing here, but I'm going to say I wrote this is like 2 free agent classes in one at running back with 3 players who were tagged last year, available this year. There's going to be more starting caliber supply than demand for starters at the position. The Eagles should act accordingly. If the price is reasonable for Saquon Barkley, make a move for a top-of-the-league running back, but don't pay $12 million per year. Howie Roseman did not listen to me. Howie Roseman signed Saquon Barkley to a deal that averages $13 million a year. They set the market at the position. I will turn this over to you because I am having too much usage time if we're going back to basketball or soccer here.
Well, you're a high usage player, man. You're a heliocentric podcaster.
What did you do you think Howie made the right move going with Barkley, paying top of the market money, or do you think they should have gone bargain bin at running back?
I think here's what I would say, because we were talking about the Giants and Hard Knocks the other day. I think Howie, he really deviated from last year when he had 3 or 4 really cheap running backs.
Yeah.
And, the Giants, they signed Singletary to a $5 million contract. So I think the idea that you say, all right, if we are going to pay for a running back, we are going to pay for a running back. We are going to pay for a top-of-the-market guy who we think is a difference maker. I at least understand that idea. We will see if in practice Saquon is that game-breaking player and if he is worthy of that investment. But I understand that. I like that there wasn't kind of a half measure. We're going to dip our toe into the running back market and we're going to go halfway. Now, the question I have for you, though, let's say they did go bargain bin. Let's say they went, $2 million, $3 million, whatever it would have been. Where is the main place you would have reallocated that money to?
That's a really good question. So again, you have to operate with the facts at the time, right? So at the time, I probably would have said that I would pay that money either to a third wide receiver, okay, or to a cornerback. We did not know at the time that they were going to end up drafting, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean with their first 2 picks. So that was a spot that they looked. I would have maybe paid a linebacker a little more than they did. And at the time, when they made that move, I did not know Devin White was going to get the deal that they got him on. I might have looked more in the Jordan Brooks territory. I thought that they've had success in this system, finding now not league average running backs, but they traded for DeAndre Swift on the last year of his deal, right? Miles Sanders was on his rookie deal. I like running backs on rookie deals. I thought maybe you trade for Dameon Pierce, right? That's a player that I mentioned in that article. I think there are good running backs you can trade for. I'm not saying you have to sign A.J. Dillon or J.K. Dobbins, two players I said at the time who were kind of 1 year, low cost signings. But I would have surveyed the trade market. That said, and I've said this, I'm consistent with this, I don't mind paying A players A money. Yeah. And Saquon Barkley is an A player. And if you want to make the argument to me that the third running back, the third receiver, Darnell Mooney is getting the same amount of money as Saquon Barkley. Saquon Barkley is a better player than Darnell Mooney. I'm fine with that argument. I just think this is an expensive price to pay for it back.
To me, just reading through this entire exercise, it's clear, because you mentioned, of course, they drafted two cornerbacks, that the place you would reallocate that money is another receiver or tight end or whatever. But at least from Howie's standpoint, you can rationalize it by saying, like, look, we're going to throw the ball to Saquon a lot, right? He is going to be our third or fourth option in the passing game, and that's going to be a huge part of the offense. And if that's the case, it'll work out, right?
Well said. You're right. And that is how they're thinking of him. Let's knock the next two out quickly. Be patient with the James Bradberry decision. I said at the time that there's no financial incentive to cut him, that they can kind of wait, see how he fits in Vic Fangio's defense. What the Eagles did was they haven't cut him. He's on the roster. They're cross-training him at safety for the reason that I said there. There's no financial incentive to cut him. There is an opportunity cost. Every snap he gets is a snap that a younger player doesn't get. But I think they're going to hold on to him to see what they have in him right now, number one. And also maybe there's an injury elsewhere and they can turn and trade him. Do you like what their approach with James Bradberry?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't like I didn't like watching James Bradberry last year. But yeah, the idea that he could play safety, I think he's too slow to play outside corner at this point. Yeah. I think that's clear. I don't think he's going to magically get his speed back next year. I guess what are the odds you think that he gets traded, would you say?
Yeah, I'm always skeptical that they're going to get something for him, right? I mean, I think an expensive player this time of year who's coming off a bad year, I think teams are probably more apt to wait for him to be cut. I think a team's only going to trade for him if they genuinely think the Eagles are going to keep him. I don't know if the Eagles are going to keep him as a depth corner, depth safety player.
Can't imagine.
Yeah,
all the depth they have in the secondary now.
But again, they guaranteed a salary, so they're paying him that no matter what. So from that perspective, I can see it.
I don't mind them giving it a shot, though, right? It's like you said, it doesn't. They've already guaranteed a salary, so might as well try and see if there's something there. My guess is there isn't something there, but that's okay.
Last one before the break here is turn right guard.
Devontae.
I skipped one. Okay, the sixth one here. Exercise Devontae Smith's fifth-year option. Work on a contract extension for Smith and Landon Dickerson. To put this quickly, the Eagles acted quickly with both players. They signed Dickerson on the first day of the league year. Devontae Smith, they exercised his fifth-year option. They gave him a new deal. Most importantly, what they did was they jumped in front of other guards and other wide receivers getting bigger deals, and they kind of got the guy that they wanted on a price that they were happy with.
Yeah, I mean, I think the Devontae one, as somebody who does not understand every idea of the salary cap and every guaranteed money versus non-guaranteed money versus years and all those things, it seems like the Devontae contract was pretty much a home run, right? Getting out
100%.
Getting out in front of that one, and when you look at some of the money and you look at some of the bigger receivers, I think the fact that Devontae is not at the elite tier probably helped a little bit too, right? Because you have guys like Jamar Chase and CeeDee Lamb. They clearly were waiting out Justin Jefferson and be like, hey man, you got to set the market for us. We're probably not going to get quite as much as you, but we want to get close, and you are the guy, and you need to do that. With Devontae, it didn't actually exist that way. So I think that one was pretty easy. I think some people were wondering about the Dickerson contract when it got signed, but there were some big deals handed out to guards in free agency. So The idea of being proactive and getting out in front of it, I get it. Two very good players, homegrown players. I like the idea of rewarding them.
I think the lesson there is if you like the player, then set the market, don't react to the market because the price is only going to go up. Before we tell you about our sponsors, I just want to finish this from Chris because he's doing the super chat. We appreciate the contributions, Chris. Hint, most disappointing losses for the Eagles over the last 20 years. I'm sorry I missed that DM. That is a good idea for a show. I'm going to sneak that in to our next grid. A Rich Zach Bo, however we frame it. He loves the show, loves Handsome Rich. Bo is cool too. Agreed. Well said. Yeah. Thank you for your support, Chris. And when we talk about thanking people for their support, I also want to thank Sleep Healthy PA. Let me tell you about our friends at Sleep Healthy PA, because at Sleep Healthy PA, they are committed to helping Philadelphia residents stop the snore and find solutions for sleep apnea that will allow you to rest well and improve your health. What causes sleep apnea? Well, there's a choke point in the throat that causes snoring, and I did not know about this until our friends at says Sleep Healthy PA started working with us. And now I know whenever I talk to someone about snoring, I say, do you know there's a choke point in the throat that causes snoring? Well, Dr. Andrew Cohen's a board certified in dental sleep medicine, and his staff will work one-on-one with you to provide first-class care that will help you meet your needs. Many physicians aren't equipped to provide options outside of CPAP machines. More than anything, Dr. Cohen just wants to see his patients healthy. He's based in Jenkintown. He's worked for years to educate dentists across the country on his personal approach to helping those with sleep apnea. His team is committed to stopping the snore. Tell him PHLY sent you. You can say Rich and Julia really want you to stop the snore. You can receive 15% off your initial workup. The process is a 2-hour initial exam split into 2 sessions. If you are experiencing sleep apnea and you're looking for a custom solution to stop the snore, reach out to Dr. Andrew Cohen at sleephealthypa.com or call 215-337-2501. Tell him PHLY sent you. You can even tell him Zach sent you too. And then I mentioned earlier the importance or the value of being a PHLY diehard. There's certainly a lot that goes into being a PHLY diehard. You get podcasts and live shows on every team every day, post-game shows, premium written content for members at allphly.com, 20% off events. And when I talk about events, we have a great golf tournament coming up this weekend. Make sure you go on Saturday. You can find all the information on the screen here. Thank you, Julie. It's at Valley Brook Country Club in Blackwood, New Jersey. It's an 8 o'clock shotgun start. There's early bird pricing. But make sure that you can find all the events you want on allphly.com. We also have great merchandise for all teams. We have a new Mitchkov shirt. Am I pronouncing it correctly? Is it Mitchkov?
I don't know.
Okay. I know how to spell it.
I think so.
Because I read your newsletter every day.
I know how to spell it.
Yeah, exactly. So do I.
I think it's Mitchkov.
You get a free shirt when you become a member. We have more shirts coming your way too, so make sure you keep checking that out. There's also a members only Discord. It's the PHLY Lounge. I'm always reading it, but I told Vince I'm gonna be contributing on it more and more. I'm gonna have my discussions there instead of just on social media. So make sure you check that out. Head over to allphly.com now and join the best sports fans in the city. Speaking about the best sports fans, Eagles fans are the best fans, and going into the offseason, the Eagles fans had a lot of expectations for this team. Among those expectations, though, or among the questions, were what they would do at right guard. And I said, and this was number 8 on my 15-step guide, turn right guard over to Tyler Steen. Don't overspend on veteran depth. The Eagles did not overspend on veteran depth. They are ostensibly turning right guard over to Tyler Steen. I say this with the asterisk that we'll see what Mekhi Becton looks like. They signed Matt Hennessy as inexpensive veteran depth. The Eagles were interested in the draft in trading up, I should say they were interested in drafting an offensive tackle that could potentially play guard. That did not work out that way. Of course, there were 6 tackles taken in the first 20 picks. So are you on board with the Eagles' approach at right guard, or do you think they should have done more this offseason.
No, I'm on board, and it's what we talked about, right? In the Landon Dickerson extension, like guards are getting expensive now, right? And if you spend a high third round pick on Tyler Steen, like you need to give him a shot to play, right? Yeah. And I know last year was a little bit of a question mark, right, with Suopeta getting time over him, but no, I would have turned it over to him. Now the Eagles were kind of, some of their public comments, they kind of turned it over to him. They're like, this guy's here and he's in that spot.
He has traits. Yeah.
I guess we'll let him go. I guess we'll let him take a few snaps. But I am on board with it, right? If you believed in him last year, I think you should give him a shot, especially with, I understand that moving Cam Jurgens to center, playing those two guys together, there is a little bit of a question mark there. But look, you still have Lane Johnson, Mailana, and Dickerson here, right? Like you should be able to form a pretty good 5-man unit with those guys. I know Bo has been kind of banging the drum. Excuse me. He's been banging the drum on that. For the first time, bang the table, the drum, that this is going to be the first time in a while that we can't pencil in the Eagles' offensive line as like a no doubt top 3, top 4 unit. First time in a while, right? But I'm still on board with that. Like you had holes elsewhere, particularly on the defensive side of the ball. I'm fine with it.
I think they are dating Steen right now. They're not married to him at right guard. Now, for all the aspiring writers and reporters out there, when you're doing this type of exercise, really go out on a limb. Have really bold takes, bold opinions, that stuff that will go viral on social media, right? Like really put yourself out there, like I did on number 9. Give Brandon Graham his farewell tour. Okay, this was the most obvious one. Brandon Graham wanted to stay in Philly. He didn't want to play elsewhere. He said this was going to be his last season. The Eagles made it easy. They gave Brandon Graham a 1-year, $5 million deal. There's no reason to complicate this. There's not much analysis given. I assume you mean, or I assume you think this was the correct action for the Eagles.
Franchise legend. Yep. Made the biggest play in the history of Philadelphia sports. Has just had an incredibly long career that is very rare in this sport. Give him whatever he wanted. And they did.
Well said. I wholeheartedly agree there. Number 10, and this is one where Howie and I kind of went on divergent paths. Find your number 3 wide receiver in the draft. I mentioned the free agents, but I said the Eagles will have enough resources tied into A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith and can find an upgrade in a loaded receiver draft class. Roman Wilson, Keon Coleman, or Troy Franklin in round 2, I asked. Jacob Cowing or Ainias Smith in the middle round. The Eagles will have options. So the Eagles did draft Ainias Smith in the middle round, if you consider round 5 a middle round. I don't know if
it's kind of a middle round.
Yeah, I don't know if Ainias Smith as the number 3 receiver is necessarily the way I would turn. But I thought the Eagles could have and should have addressed wide receiver earlier. How do you feel they went with the number 3 spot?
He had a fun highlight tape. I know most highlight tapes are fun, Ainias Smith, but for a guy who didn't really blow anybody away from a testing standpoint, like he might be a guy that's better once they put the pads on. I can at least dream of that being the case.
Usually they say be better once they put the pads on for a guy who doesn't look good when the pads aren't on.
Yeah, that's true. Did he look bad when the pads were on?
I didn't love the way he looked this spring, but again, it was I saw him he was hurt for the beginning of it. I saw him for like 3 practices. No, I'm looking forward to seeing Ainias Smith this offseason or this summer. That's for sure.
Well, and just reading your description, I would say the time when the Eagles could have made a bigger investment is in the 3rd round of the draft, right?
Exactly.
You mentioned Troy Franklin in the 2nd round. Mm-hmm. They could have gotten him even after all those trades they made, right? They could have gotten, and instead they take Jalix Hunt, who is this project pass rusher, which I understand, but is probably not going to help the team that much this year. Maybe he will on special teams, but I think he's got to learn how to play football a little bit, and that's what Vic Fangio's job is to teach him how to do that. They really did not fill this hole, but I guess the hope is that it's Saquon Barkley who's doing a lot of the heavy lifting there.
Yeah, good point there. Because when you look at the Jalix Hunt pick, and I like the upside of Jalix Hunt, but we talked about that being a project-type player, right? And so Luke McCaffrey was the next wide receiver taken after the Eagles picked Hunt. But then Troy Franklin, and he's someone who in our draft coverage, I was high on. I think it was a good pick in Denver, and I think that's one they might regret not taking. Javon Baker was, or I should say Javon Baker was in the 4th round. Tez Walker, a wide receiver that I liked, was also in the 4th round. So you could say that the Eagles, they took a Nia Smith in the 5th round, and that's someone that they had a decent grade on. He's someone that they identified going into the draft. But I think Troy Franklin in the 4th round is someone who, in the 3rd round, someone who would have interested me. That said, I think some of the draft plans, I don't want to say changed or were disrupted, but when Cooper DeJean fell to the 2nd round, the Eagles were aggressive and appropriately so. We will get to that quickly here, or shortly here, rather. But yeah, I think the Eagles could have and should have done more at wide receiver 3. Paris Campbell is the likely player there. They can still make a move, but you can say you have A.J. Brown, you have Devontae Smith. We saw last year in the playoffs what happens when A.J. Brown's not on the field. We saw in Week 18 what happens when A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith aren't on the field. Those guys have been remarkably healthy for the Eagles, and I just wonder what this offense will look like with one or both injured.
I'd also just like to see kind of more of a threat in that spot. Nick would always talk about Quez Watkins, and he'd be like, look, he does things for our offense, which I assume just take the top off
run
the defense,
deep,
right?
Yeah,
run deep,
fast.
and hopefully, that opens up stuff for AJ and Devontae. But I think we saw how that worked, and the answer is he also took a ton of things off the table in terms of did you really care if Quez Watkins was running deep? I would still focus on AJ Brown and Devontae Smith. So I would like kind of a more dynamic target with the ball in his hand, somebody who's a little more versatile than that. We'll see if they do that.
Yeah, no, that's well said here. Talking about the draft, number 11 here, draft an offensive tackle in the first 2 rounds. And I talked about in my blurb having a backup plan for Lane Johnson. As I said, going into the draft, you can always have a tackle that slides over to guard. Now, the Eagles were interested in the top tackles. You saw that with their visits, but 6 went off the board in the first 20 picks, and that's also why cornerbacks kind of got pushed down the board. So I think if Quinyon Mitchell had gone earlier, then maybe a guy like Troy Fautanu is the Eagles' pick, or Amarius Mims. If Cooper DeJean was not an option in the 2nd round, maybe Kingsley Suamatea would have been the Eagles' pick there. Given how the board fell, I think Howie Roseman operated fine. There was no offensive tackle that I would have taken over Quinyon Mitchell at number 22. There was no offensive tackle that I would have taken over Cooper DeJean when they took Cooper DeJean, or in terms of them trading up for him. So again, I said at the start of this, one of the things with this exercise is you don't know how the board's going to fall, and I think the Eagles operated well here.
You did not know there would be an unprecedented run on offense at the beginning of the first round. You didn't know Michael Penix was going to get picked. And,
yes.
What a moment that was in the live show as well. That was just absolutely stunning. It was just a crazy amount of offense in the first half of the first round. And I like what the Eagles did. It's like you said, I think Quinyon Mitchell at the time you wrote this, if you looked in mock drafts, he was being projected as the 10th pick, the 11th pick. He was not really making it to the Eagles in a lot of those drafts. And so the Eagles they let Quinyon Mitchell fall, and then they trade up for Cooper DeJean. I like it, right? It's not like they went crazy and were drafting a running back. Cornerback is, maybe it's not quite as premium of a position as offensive tackle, but it's up there, and it was their biggest need going into the offseason. So I have no problem with what Howie Roseman did. I have no problem with your prediction either, too. Yeah. You just didn't know what the board was going to look like.
Exactly. And that kind of ties into my next one here, number 12. Draft 2 cornerbacks, including one in the first 3 rounds and one who can play in the slot. The Eagles drafted 2 corners. They drafted one in the first round, one in the 2nd round, and they definitely drafted one who can play in the slot. Cooper DeJean can absolutely play in the slot. This one, if you had told me when I wrote this that they'd be able to get Mitchell and DeJean, I would have said you're nuts, right? So for them to land that, this is a boon for the Eagles.
Great draft. No notes.
Well said. Let's go to 13 here, which is acquire a 2025 day 2 pick. And I said that because I said it's the type of down the line thinking that has benefited the Eagles in the past few years when they've had a surplus of picks in, I said, the first 2 rounds. Also, there's an argument that the draft might be deeper next season given the relative dearth of underclassmen this year with the NIL era of college football kicking in. And that's precisely what the Eagles did. They didn't get a first or second round pick, but they traded back this year in round 4, and they were able to trade a 4th round pick for a 2025 3rd round pick. And Howie Roseman cited the expected strength of next year's draft. What were your thoughts of this strategy for the Eagles?
I think you and Bo talked about it in the show after the draft. Like, you don't want to be, too positive. Like, I think we by trade are skeptical people, and maybe this isn't going to work out. But the maneuvering that Howie Roseman did to get that pick, it's hard to argue with it, right?
Well said, yeah.
It certainly made the draft stream a little bit longer that night. I think Bo was over there and he was passed out because of that day 2 pick you're talking about in 2025. But just in terms of value, I like the way he moved around the board. It's good.
Yeah, I'm with you there. You see this sometimes in the NBA where a fan base is like critical of trading for a future pick, but then when that future pick turns into Jason Tatum, right? Now that's obviously like the best case scenario situation. But I think that the Eagles did a good job forecasting of what next year's draft might be. Like, the numbers were clear. This was the lowest amount of underclassmen, or the fewest underclassmen in like 2 decades, right? And I think it's kind of it's going to correct itself. It's going to normalize itself, similar to that year in the NBA when they instituted the age limit, and so there's that 1 year when like it was kind of like a lapse in talent, and the next year was a double class. Yeah. So I think the Eagles did a good job there. They also have a 2026 day 2 pick that they got in the Hassan Reddick deal. So 2 more here. I'm mostly interested in number 14, your perspective. I said stack the deck for Tanner McKee to win the number 2 job. And the Eagles did not take this suggestion. They traded for Kenny Pickett. They wanted the young, cost-controlled former first-round pick who has starting experience. But I think if they went with McKee, they would have liked it.
I thought McKee, and look, I know Bo is the foremost. He's leading not just the Church of Ellis, but also the Tanner McKee fan club as well. I thought he was really good in the preseason, right? Mm-hmm. And, asking him to be the number 2 quarterback after a year of learning, right? Like, I didn't think that was a crazy idea, but it's a quarterback factory, and they just wanted to go after Kenny Pickett and his small hands. I have no idea if, Kenny Pickett actually would be like a good backup, but I just think Tanner McKee showed enough in the preseason that I would have liked to have seen more. But they also know a lot more internally about Tanner McKee, who did, Marcus Mariota didn't even see the field last year, much less Tanner McKee.
So I think that you framed it well there. I think they wanted someone who's played, right? They wanted to take out some of the unknown. I think the Pickett decision was made independent of McKee. I don't think that was an indication of what they thought of McKee, as much as I think that Pickett was a guy that they liked coming out of Pitt. They thought he kind of fit what they were looking for at that spot, in particular having starting experience and still on a cost-controlled contract. But if you took the pedigree out of it, I think McKee would have been a sensible option for the Eagles.
What do you think the fan base reaction will be? Because we know Jalen Hurts is probably not going to play at all in the preseason. If Kenny Pickett has a Marcus Mariota level preseason from last year, and McKee does the same exact thing.
I think they'll be pushing for McKee, right? I think there's already been exposure to Pickett. Now, the inverse is like if Pickett looks great, they'll probably be calling for him to be the starting quarterback. But no, I think McKee's like an easy guy to get behind because like from a passing camp perspective, he can fling the ball or chuck the ball all over the field. But I think Pickett, I actually think Pickett's going to have a good preseason. He was really good for the Steelers in the preseason last year. He's kind of one of those gamer type quarterbacks.
He's a great August player.
Yeah, exactly. And I think
loves the humidity.
And I actually think the trade that they made, trading from the 3rd to the 4th to get Pickett, was a fine price to pay for a backup quarterback. I just think that if they had signed like a journeyman quarterback to a 1-year deal, I think McKee could have beaten him out.
Like I just, if McKee was essentially their backup quarterback right now, I don't think I would think much differently of the Eagles roster overall.
Sure.
The fact that they have Kenny Pickett is not any more assuring to me, or like more of a downer either too. Like he's just a guy.
Last one here is keep your eyes on an upgrade at number 2 tight end, but don't force it and consider the trade market. So what the Eagles did here is they certainly did not force it. They signed C.J. Uzomah as veteran insurance. They're going to give Grant Calcaterra and Albert Wakebaum. I'm sorry, Albert O. I'm working on that. They gave him.
You didn't have much of a chance to workshop it last year.
They're going to give him a chance to win the number 2 job. How do you think the Eagles approach number 2 tight end this offseason?
I just don't think they really value the position that highly.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
I just think it was slim pickings. I think it was a bad draft year, and I mean they could have gone Jatavian Sanders in the second round. I'm sorry, in the 4th round, or I'm sorry, the 3rd round rather. But I didn't think this was a great tight end class. There was nowhere really to turn in free agency. I don't think it's that they don't value the position. I just think that they didn't see the market as fruitful.
Would you bet that they draft one next year?
Yes. Good question there. Because I'm telling you this, when I do my 2025, if I were Howie Roseman, this is what I would do. A dress tight end is going to be on that list. And I have a 2025 draft show on Friday. I think I'm happy to say it with I hope I'm not speaking out of turn saying it now, but Devin Jackson, the great draft analyst from the Inquirer, is going to be here helping me with some of my 2025 players to know, maybe with a pronunciation or two as well. I think next year there's some tight ends that the Eagles should be looking at. Maybe Oscar Delp from Georgia is someone who we'll be discussing. There's a few other guys there, but I think that Dallas Goedert, there's no certainty that he's on the team in 2025.
That's fair.
We're already at the 1 hour, 2 minute mark here, but before we wrap up, what's your big picture takeaway from my approach to what Howie Roseman did?
Well, I think, and it's what our show was on Friday. I think it all hinges on how much money they gave Saquon versus, and I think that affects, do they spend a little more money on a safety, whether it's Xavier McKinney? Do they spend more money on Darnell Mooney as the 3rd option? But that is where the biggest divergence is, and that is where, I think that certainly affected how they attacked other positions.
Yeah. I think that this exercise shows that what my wife says is true. I think about Howie Roseman too much, probably. Yeah. What's that? There's that meme that I see. Look, I'm kind of hip right now, right? Where it's like,
can't wait for this.
It's like that husband and that wife sitting, or maybe they're not married. That couple sitting in bed, and she's like, I wonder what he's thinking about. Emily's never wondering. I'm thinking about what moves they're gonna make in the 2025 draft. So yeah, I think as I've kept doing this exercise, I probably think more and more like Howie, that my opinions become less original.
Nailed it, and you described the meme perfectly as well.
This was a quick show. This was a fun show. I enjoyed this. But we will be back tomorrow. I shouldn't say but. We will be back tomorrow at noon discussing. They are 2 weeks away from training camp officially tomorrow. They report 2 weeks from tomorrow. So that's 14 days. So we are going to do Bo's going to be listening to this and saying, how'd you think of this number, Zach? We're going to do 14 things. We're going to go back and forth, 7 each, on what we're looking forward to, what we're excited about with training camp, and let the countdown begin then. So you can watch that at noon tomorrow. You can read all our work on allphly.com. You can read Rich's newsletter in your inbox every morning. Thank you to Julia for the outstanding work producing the show. Thank you for watching. Bo will say, as always, we love you. I will say, we'll do better tomorrow.
We all silly like the mayor.